So we're going to start in about 1 minute. I wanted to thank everybody for attending. This is my first video webinar for a security conference. So I really appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to listen to a little bit about what I have to say regarding security frameworks. What is this? So just getting started. My name is Luckey, and I am the Security Operations Manager for U.S. Public Sector with Cisco up in Research Triangle Park here in Raleigh, North Carolina. I had a very unconventional start in career paths, so I always love to take an opportunity to share not only what I've learned, but a little bit of that backstory as well. And that's kind of how, we're going to start this presentation. And then if you guys wouldn't mind keeping all of your questions to the end, we'll wrap it up with a really nice Q&A. If you do have a pressing question and you don't want to forget it, I encourage everybody to drop it in the chat. And then I will comb through those once we get to the end of the presentation. So cybersecurity, not another framework, cutting through the noise. I consider it very noisy conversation when it comes to not just security, but frameworks, to accreditations, to any type of requirements driving why we can't have ease of access and anything that, stands to impact network operations from going fast. And so this presentation, I put it together so that you all can take an opportunity to learn and put something in your toolbox that you can bring to a conversation if you feel like it's getting a little too noisy. But let's start with my journey. So my journey, the non-traditional route. The reason why I started it like this is because my career path has been nothing non-traditional is the right word. I didn't go to college traditionally, like out of high school. I joined the military when I was 17. And the career that I had was great, but it had nothing to do with cybersecurity. In that time that I was in the Army, I became a mother of 3. And I love my children very much, which is why I decided after 13 years to make what some consider a drastic career pivot. So when I was in the military, I worked on air to ground radios, which is communications loosely, but it has nothing to do with information systems, security, information assurance, none of that. So what I did do though was during my pregnancies, I taught myself everything I could about IT, about computers, about baselining, about reimaging, what made them work, how to set up Active Directory, how to set up, folder structures. This really captured my attention. I loved learning about it. I loved applying it. But what I loved the most was when it worked and when it benefited the people I was supporting mission-wise, right? So my commanders, my first sergeants, like anybody that was in charge of me, that, at the end of the day, I wanted them to be happy and I wanted our mission to be successful. So it helped drive it in a different way that, if it wasn't for my kids, I don't think I would have had the ability to learn and grow in that direction. A little bit more about my personal journey though. I am a huge advocate for fitness. I love 5K runs, color runs. I am a marathon runner, or was in a past life. The last marathon I did was in Afghanistan. And then I did a half marathon Spartan race once I did end up getting out of the military. I highly suggest not doing it in 90-degree weather. I'm an artist, so I love painting, I love creating, I love anything that can, make, again, people happy, and show light and bring joy to the people around me that I care about. That ties into poetry. Writing's always been a passion of mine. And when I say passion, I mean like really, really young, just natural knack for writing. And kind of actually used that to get into my career, at least in the very, very beginning. And I leveraged that as a strength, my ability to write and communicate in that way to learn more about the cybersecurity industry. In the 3 years that I've been in the industry so far, I've become what some people consider a leader and a mentor. I mentor several mentees, and but additionally I'm a mentee myself. I'm always seeking out other mentors and other peers in the industry that are growing and that are like-minded and have a story to tell or have a way to innovate the way we're doing business, the way we're approaching security, especially if it involves that keyword innovation, right? How do we not impact networking in a negative way? How do we have the difficult conversation to come up with a very creative solution where everybody's happy at the end of it? That doesn't impact the team in a negative way either. So either their time or, you know, what have you. It's always ease for me, it's ease of access, ease of use, but securely. And working with mentors and peers is how I get to that ability. I don't have a natural knack for thinking outside of the box. So not only to be considered that, right, to be surrounded by it is something that has been instrumental in my journey so far. And like I said earlier, this is my second career. This is not my first, it was not my first pick. When I joined the military at 17, cybersecurity wasn't an option. It wasn't a degree. It wasn't like I could go to school and say, yeah, I'm going to get my undergrad in cybersecurity. That didn't exist. I could take an elective, right, in computer science or information technology, but there was no concentrated degrees of any kind. So it would have to have been something, a side effort, and then, put my concentration into something else. And I didn't necessarily want to go that route either. So I didn't start working towards my degree in cybersecurity until much later in life. So it started about a year at the end of my Army transition, and it started with my first certification, which was Security Plus. And then I learned that in this industry, some of our certifications, depending on what they are, can count for ACE credits and can count towards your college degree as a whole. So that's the path I took. That's the route I'm still taking. I'm still enrolled in night school. I still am actively involved in any type of internship that's willing to, one, help me grow, two, help me learn, and three, just to be the best I can for any project that I'm supporting, right? So those are always my top three goals in mind when deciding on taking a course or, learning something new. So my latest and greatest is learning about security development lifecycle. That's been my last 3 months, but learning it to a point where I'm now giving presentations about it and I'm helping management make big decisions as we stand up this process for the project I support, right? I don't half-ass anything. I am all in all the time on anything I want to dedicate and focus on because I want to try and tie it to my passion, right? So for me, that's been very successful. Finding what I'm passionate about and then going all in. So again, no half steps, no anything like that. If I hit a blocker, I have a conversation with one of my mentors or one of my peers. Um, and what helps drive that capability is I am also the chapter president and chapter lead of two nonprofit organizations for my local area. I don't expect everybody to get involved with nonprofit work. That's not, the goal here, but that's how I do it, right? This is a part of my journey and how I did it. I went to night school. I was driving to night school for 6 months after I got out of the military. And when I was up there, I was exposed to a 501c3 organization known as the ISSA Raleigh chapter. And I was like, oh my goodness, Where is this in Fayetteville, North Carolina? Do we have one of these? So I asked the question and it was no, which was a little bit disappointing. But I think the more surprising was that there were people here that I hadn't met yet that had similar vision and similar goals. And so my next step was just to have that conversation and see how realistic it was and what we had to do and the steps we had to take to get to where we are now. Um, which has been very successful, I think, all around, not just for our local area, but the amazing partnerships that we've made along the way with organizations like Onward to Opportunity and Fayetteville Technical Community College. I also partner, as you can see in my photo, with the Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu. So I am the Eastern Carolina chapter lead for that organization as well. Again, completely nonprofit. We're all volunteer organization, but what makes it great is it's where our heart is, it's where our passion is. And when you're passionate about something, it never feels like work. So, I mean, yes, it might get frustrating, right, when you're trying to put on an event like ISSA Triad has brought you guys today. But again, another amazing organization for an area that needs it, that's bringing you training about cybersecurity. I love it. Like I can't get enough about it. Like it makes me happy. So that's a little bit of my non-traditional journey, but more of my traditional one, right? So behind the scenes, what does it take? Well, I get asked that question a lot, and it takes a lot. It takes grit. It takes grind. It takes, and this is to quote a mentor of mine, Rob Martin, but you should be exhausted at the end of every week. And if you're passionate about it, it's what you're going to get up and do again because it's worth it, right? You don't ever want to be exhausted at the end of the week and be like, oh my goodness, what am I doing this for, right? That's not a good feeling. At least for me, that's not a good feeling. But if I can say, man, it's Friday, I'm shot, but look at everything I've gotten done. Yes, it was a hard week, but yes, it was worth it. Then I keep driving, I keep pushing, I keep working harder, and I share. Every time I learn something new, I seek out an opportunity to share that with the people around me because the value isn't that I know it. I know there's a lot of people, especially in American society, knowledge is power. Awesome. Cool. I'm more of the mentality of share that knowledge so that the collective can be powerful. And then we could be successful in our individual jobs. Not all of you work with me. You're not on the team, I support, right? You have your own day jobs. Some of you may or may not even be in the career field yet, right? It's sharing this successful knowledge with all of you so that you can be successful in the ways in your life that this can apply to. And that's, for me, at the end of the day, what it's all about. Um, a little bit more of the behind the scenes is becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? That's where growth happens. And I don't have to throw up, a diagram of what this looks like, but growth happens when your brain realizes, oh man, all right, this is a little uncomfortable. I may or may not like it. I'm not freaking out, but this isn't my comfort zone, right? When you're there, that's when it's critical to have the conversations. Because to me, it's when I'm there, it means I'm ready to grow, I'm ready to move, I'm ready to make a next step, I'm ready to do a presentation or share or something like that. So I always look for that feeling of uncomfortable as a sign, okay, now who do I have a conversation with? Who do I reach out to? Who do I get to do a live podcast with? Or, are there any speaking opportunities? And what do I want to talk about? What do I want to share? Do I have something relevant to share? Or am I just going to do, another talk on career transition, which I love, I do, because again, very successful. I think I've been at, my career transition, but it only has value if I could share that with other people. It doesn't do me anything to sit on a pedestal and say, well, I'm successful. I'm not going to tell you how I got here, right? Um, So when I was given this opportunity to talk, I wanted to kind of talk about how I learned how to cut through the noise of all the questions surrounding security and accreditations and frameworks and what applies, what doesn't apply, who says it applies, right? It was just, it was very noisy for me almost at every meeting room table I sat at for a solid 4 months. And it's starting to die down now. But it wasn't until, I put together a very small slide deck internally for the team that I work for, and I was like, here, look at it like this. And that's when management saw it, and I could see they saw it, right? It was on their faces. So I wanted to take the opportunity to show and share a little bit of that with all of you. So where did I start, right? So you're on a project, you're not quite live, you're not supporting customers. That's right, that's the perspective of the project I'm on now. But I didn't just pull from my current state. I pulled from my first job when I got out of the military, which I was the information assurance manager on Pope, right? And I was a technical writer in that role. I learned really fast and really well how to put together a package, right, that spoke to all of the DoD security controls that were required. Um, and I learned a lot very fast. So it was a double accreditation, and we did that all in a year. Um, right after that, I went and I supported the Joint Special Operations Command, and I did it again for them, but faster. So in half the time, and I had no team. So it was just me. Um, but that's where I really got my start, right? And I learned to find what I was passionate about. And somehow for me, it always started with compliance. Like there was something about it. There was something about the structure of the way that we have 19 security control families that are broken out into, it's streamlined. It's pretty, and there's subcategories. There's, you know, control enhancements, and it just becomes a very easy way of checking and balancing where your project is at. And I liked it. What made me uncomfortable was when I took a step into more of a corporate setting. So I now work for Cisco. I now support them, right? And I run their security operations center. Not only do I run it, I architect it, like I built it. Um, so I was the SOC architect, and now I'm the SOC manager, but most recently I am just the overarching security manager. So but how did I get there, right? Because for them, it wasn't the easy, okay, here's your NIST framework, right? There's that word, apply, and it's a one size fits all. It's not, because they had other standards that came into consideration that I had never had exposure to. So again, finding that passion though, compliance was at, the core of that. And it's like, okay, so what does apply then, right? um, do things like organizations like DISA still apply, right? Is it just NIST? What other frameworks am I pulling in here? What other methodologies do I have to think about that can make us be successful? Do we want to use, old frameworks or old ideas that may not have worked as well and continue to try and apply them as we move forward and go live? Or does it make more sense to deep dive into something that we may or may not know that much about? And at the end of it, it's kind of a melting pot, right? So some of it I had influence in saying no, and this is why we should go this way. So a great example of that is leveraging the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Um, but it's not, my point is it's not single threaded. Um, but the key takeaway on this slide is sharing with you where I got my start, how I found my passion, so that I can encourage all of you to do the same thing. Your strength, your passion is not going to be Nia Luckey's strength and passion, right? It's going to be yours. And it's going to be different for every single person, but find it and then, drive it in that direction. Why? There we go. Apologies. So what did I learn, right? So now you know where I started and what my suggestion is there, but what have I learned? So in almost 4 years, I've had 3 jobs, right? And I just finished sharing with all of you that most of them supported DoD or federal spaces, right? So, but with a company like Cisco, it's a bit of an in-between, right? So where I am at now is I've learned, the following things. I've learned that there are over 250 different cybersecurity frameworks. That's noisy, that's chattery, that's chaotic alone. There's several different life cycles too, security specific life cycles, and they all have either the same letters just in a different order, or they have the same exact letters. So I most recently we have a Cisco development security lifecycle, and we have the RMF version of continuous security development lifecycle. So very similar, but very different. Um, but again, that goes back to my original point. That's the noise. That's the chatter. Those are the conversations that make me want to like pull my hair out. Because to me, it shouldn't be that complicated. And if you get stuck on that conversation can last over a month and the project's not moving anywhere because we can't agree on what the letters in an acronym stand for or what should apply or doesn't apply. I've also learned that we're at a point of, again, we have 19 security control families, right? And we have over 1,000 security controls and or enhancement controls or subcontrols. That's a lot. I'm not an expert on every single one, but I know if we're talking about something like multi-factor authentication, we're probably talking about the AC control family. I've taken the time to learn to a certain point that if a topic of discussion is brought up, that it can fall in which control family it falls into. But that also kind of speaks to where my passion pulled me. I am an advocate for the NIST framework because it works well with so many others. It integrates with FedRAMP. It integrates with CIS. It integrates with MITRE. It integrates to a bigger picture. And once you have that core developed, without getting too ahead of myself, you can then pull that up and beyond into threat modeling and then maturity modeling, which again, it's a holistic approach. It's not just saying, here's a framework, we're good to go. It's a vital piece of a bigger process and a bigger goal, right? I've learned that that something I thought was extremely DoD specific is not. So we have security technical implementation guides or STIGs, and we have the SRGs, which are the requirements. But those don't just apply to federal spaces or US public sector or DoD specific entities anymore either. Um, which I think is refreshing, but I don't think a lot of people know that. So if you're not finding, if you're finding that there is chatter or confusion around a framework because it's missing a piece, my suggestion on that block is to leverage something like, okay, what security requirements are you using? What technical guides are you using, right? Here's an example of one that could apply to the device you're trying to harden, or the part of your network that needs a little bit more security because it's deemed a critical asset, right? But this is my way of giving you that little tool because that has saved me in so many conversations where the rigor isn't defined in the security control itself. It's actually defined down to the technical, very technical coding level in a STIG or in an SRG. I've also learned most recently threat modeling and zero trust aren't necessarily the same thing. And not a lot of people know that either. They don't like the idea of zero trust networks because they're very labor intensive to stand up if that's not the model you've built to, right? So if you already have a project in flight and it's successful and it's already live and it's already supporting customers and consumers, to introduce something like a zero trust model can be highly disruptive to your network operations, and it's probably not going to be well received as a suggestion from management or to management, right? So what I've learned though is you can leverage something like threat modeling to have a more productive conversation. Um, and then tie that threat modeling piece and your knowledge in those areas into, okay, so how do we, stabilize a SIM, right? How do we pull that into our incident and event management, right? And then how do we stabilize that? And how do we ensure that all of this data is secure while we're doing it, right? So those are the key lessons of what I've learned up into this point. But it's these 6 primary areas that have helped cut through some of the more difficult conversations where people are literally saying the same thing, just in very different ways. The conversations that you have with a CISO are not the same types of conversations you're going to have with your director or your VP, right? It's not my conversation with the SOC team is not the same conversation I have with my actual security operations team. It's very different, but at the end of the day, more often than not, we're saying the same exact thing, just in, again, very different ways. So what, right? I've learned all of these great things, but what do we do? What do we do with it, right? What is it? What's the point? So we know, again, and here's a list of them right in front of us, bunch of frameworks, right? And they're all great and they're all different and they're all kind of actually the same. So at the core of every framework, doesn't matter the name, you have, and this is again off NIST methodology, but I love the simplicity in the way they break it out. So you have a profile, you have your tiers. Oop, I clicked, apologies. Right, and then in each area, you have steps. So you have your core, you have your tiers, you have your profiles, but then you have steps in between. And as long as you can have a conversation, right, as the security expert or the person giving the opinion or, being asked the question, right, it's a conversation of threat versus risk, right? So the higher your threat, typically the higher your risk percentage, right? So, but the higher, if you can break that conversation down a little bit further to express like, okay, let's get rid of the scary words, right? So threat, that makes people defensive. Risk, that makes people really defensive, right? So let's have a conversation then on how to improve your level of trust in me so that we can lower our risk, right? So the idea is that through developing your core, your tiers, and your profile through a framework, your level of trust with your management and your team is going to rise. And then you're going to apply metrics that are going to actually demonstrate that your percentage of risk is actually low. Now, it is going to get to a point where it's probably going to stabilize, right? But that stabilization is going to allow that trust level to continue to climb, especially as you're able to support customers, you're able to scale, you're able to maybe leverage your threat modeling to eventually, develop a zero trust model, right? Not all right away. Not sure too many businesses that would do that unless you're building one from scratch. Um, but phase it out, use that phased approach. But again, if you don't have that trust, then the conversation comes back to, well, it's threat versus risk. And when in reality, it's a much broader conversation, right? But it's professionals like myself and every single one of you that's on this call that you have that conversation, right? And you choose the right one that fits the project and its customers and the people that are consuming the service, right? I don't want to apply a framework like FISMA to a project that it doesn't belong on, right? I don't want to use COBIT if the one I should be using is ITIL or the preferred is ITIL and I don't necessarily have, you know, the education to speak that it shouldn't be or should be. It's just more of, again, finding your passion, finding the one that can tie in the best. And even if that means doing a little bit of research on the weekends or during the work week when you have an hour in between your virtual meetings, um, find it and speak to it, right? But speak to it educated and utilize, this slide if you need to, right? To say, okay, let's start with step one. What is step one? Let's prioritize and scope this out. Step two, let's reorient, right? Let's figure out where we're at in this process, in the whole picture, and keep taking your steps until you have all three of those areas defined. And once you have that, odds are you're going to instantly know which framework or frameworks apply. That's how you cut through the noise. That's how you die down the chatter and you say, okay, these are the questions, come back to me with the answers. And once we have those answers, again, you should be able to look at this list and be like, okay, well, this one applies, this one doesn't, and so on and so forth. It doesn't have to be a back and forth for months on end. And this is where it lands me on this huge point, because just because you run a framework or we've applied one, it doesn't mean you're secure. And probably one of my newest mentors, whether she realizes it or not, said that earlier this month when I was on a live podcast with her. And it resonated with me so much because it's so simple. It's such a simple statement, but it's so true. So you had an audit, right? So you applied NIST 853. That doesn't mean you're secure at the end of the day. It doesn't mean that your risk percentage is low, and it doesn't mean that I trust the results, right? So basic questions to ask when building out a project's core. So going back to a couple of slides, right? We had those three areas. We had core, tiers, and profile. So when you're building out the project core, here are some, key questions that either you can ask yourself or you can ask the people that seem either confused to help drive the conversation in a more productive direction, right? So again, like I said, leaning on a framework that I'm a huge advocate of because of its simplicity is NIST. So you have identify, protect, detect, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? But the bigger question is, what do we have in place that's already doing this? Do we have anything in place? If we don't, what isn't in place is probably the more glaring question that I've come across a lot is, do we have this actually written down somewhere, or are we literally going off of the 853 NIST? Like, probably not a good idea. Do we have a policy? Do we have a procedure? Do we have a guideline? Do we have playbooks, runbooks? And unfortunately, in a lot of projects and a lot of situations and scenarios, the common answer tends to be no, or they'll have like a high level policy that doesn't really apply to the project, if that makes sense. Um, at least that's my experience. So, but you're starting with the basics. You're starting with the, okay, for identify, do we have this defined? If we don't have it defined, let's define it, right? And not define it in context of get on Google, type in identify, and there's your definition. What I mean by that is have a working session, right? So net out area by area what that means. So, and these are great examples of how that working session could play out. But for identify, right? We're talking in some cases, it could be asset management, it could be business environment, it could be governance, it could be risk assessment or risk management strategy. Detect could be anomalies and events, right? What do we have in place for that? Continuous monitoring, detection process. How are we detecting that? Is it log ingestion? Are we pointing it at, already identified common events, like Windows has very common events that you can build queries for and put into a sim like Splunk? What are we using? What does it look like? Do we have, host intrusion prevention in place? Do we have network intrusion prevention in place, which are very different things? What is our boundary looking for versus what are individual hosts looking for? Are they the same? Should they not be the same? And if not, again, where's that gap? And then how are we answering it for at the end of the day? But during your original working session, you're not getting that far into the weeds. You're writing down the top level basics, right? You don't want to end up going down a rabbit hole and trying to defend what analysis is when you don't even know what else respond looks like, right? Do we have a response planning policy in place? The communications, do we have a call chart? What does that look like? Who are those people, right? You need to take the time and pause on the areas of where you need the detail before you jump to the details. That I can't express enough. And that I've experienced probably the most is let's hyper focus on this one point to a point where we're completely off topic. And then it's pulling that back in. So, but to the original point, like you want to allow the innovation, you want to allow the conversation to a certain point, but if it's not benefiting a working session like this, then absolutely, just raise the hand, say, hey, great point, but maybe let's set up a meeting or a side discussion about that. I'd really like us to get through what we're here to get through. Again, breaking through all of that noise and all of that chatter, because these conversations I've found a lot of people are going to have input about and they're going to get very passionate about. And there's a lot of conversations that they want to have, but we have to be selective, especially if it is a working session that's defining these areas because we don't already have them defined, right? And then once you have each category defined, you can set up another working session where you're taking it a step further, do a series, do 3 or 4 working sessions, right? And then start asking yourself in the team, how do we implement the following areas we just defined, right? Again, though, always circle back to, is there a policy, process, or procedure to reference? But this is where you're actually asking for links. You're asking for hard copies. You're asking for, yes, I hear your verbal yes, but I would like to see it. How old is it? Is it current? When was the last time it was updated? So every time you ask a question or you reference those, right, it's kind of with a different scope or lens. That way you don't tunnel vision, right? So when you're at this point and that's what you're looking for. It's all in the details, because if you have a access control policy that is 3 years old, probably needs to be updated, right? Need to, and I'm not saying scratch it and start over. No, I'm not an advocate for that. I'm always one that wants to read what's in place and what's driving what, you know, I'm working on, and then where can we improve, right? So it's more from that perspective. I'm not saying that all of you should be, reviewing or editing policy or anything like that, but I would encourage you to just ask these questions right after you have those areas defined, right? What are the applicable security controls here? Like, I'm hearing recover, but yeah, there's a lot that we could, you know, comb through that would technically speak to recover. But if my CIA triad is a low, right? A low, 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 and not a moderate, there's different controls that are going to apply. But at this point in the conversation, rest assured you're going to have the support of your management team. And if you don't, then you should, and at a minimum, whoever your security officer is or your compliance officer is. These are all great people. Your change manager, if you have one of those, just good peers to surround yourself with to have these conversations with if it's not your management team. Especially if you are in a security type of role. These are the questions to ask, especially if you find a gap or you find something that either broke or ended up being a security event or incident, right? So I'm learning that a lot of my conversations and my process improvement are around areas like that right now. It's here's the event or here's the incident. What do we have in place? What are the next steps? And then finding the gaps in that process as we comb through that. But that also speaks to, your project's maturity as a whole. And I'm currently on a project that doesn't have a maturity model in place because of where we're at. And not every project's going to be like that. And not every security role is going to have those types of conversations going on at, the table, right? So, but if your job in any capacity is improving security operations or the flow of operations or how we can be better and more innovative and automate, then these are definitely crucial questions to ask when either things go wrong or just to be prepared to answer for, right? Because if not, a lot of side conversations have the potential to spin up that you may or may not have control over once they do. But it's crucial that when you do get to this point that you remind yourself, and most importantly, the team you're supporting, like build out each area until everybody's content. This is where you want consensus. This is where you want agreement. You want from the highest level of management that actually has eyes in on your project and cares, down to the most junior technician to understand the specifications and the requirements that are being set, right? Otherwise, the impact and the disruption when you stand up a process or you make a security change or you change the posture of something can be detrimental, and it can be very, like I said, very disruptive, and confusing. Most of the feedback I've had before I received or before I was in my current position, is that a lot of the decisions that were made regarding security, there was no conversation. There was no explanation. It was, this is how it is now, suck it up. But when it came to their questions, which get pretty technical, um, the answers fell flat because they didn't have a way to explain the requirements or the why, right? So that's the point of this slide, is be prepared to have the conversation behind the why we're doing something, especially if it's changing something that's already been in place or correcting something that we just haven't had time to correct yet, right? Because I don't know, for me, sometimes it feels like the room's on fire, right? And there's fires everywhere, but it's which one do we want to focus on today? And at the end of the day, though, the people that are doing the work, if it's confusing up here, right? If it's confusing at the decision maker level, at the implementation level, it's going to be, the chaos is going to be even worse, right? And it's going to be a huge communication disconnect. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is cutting through that noise and chatter too, because that noise and chatter is what leads to people quitting their jobs, poor job satisfaction, right? And right now, in times like this, where a lot of your management teams are removed and we're remote, and your actual technicians are on site, it's communication to a point of over communication is critical. But it's not communicating just for the sake of it or saying, well, I told you. It's giving purpose behind it, and that's what this is saying, okay, how do we approach this? How do I explain it? And have just a very, not oversimplified, but a very direct way to answer their questions when they, when they arise. So once you've gotten to this point, which is a lot of work, right? So what I've just described was probably an 8-month process just to get to this point. But now you want to define the process that can support the framework, right? So how do we do that? How do we define that process? Because there's multiple. You have processes, you have life cycles, you have maturity modeling, you have everything else this can step up into next, right? Well, before you do that, ask yourself, when it comes to these 4 areas, so you have respond, monitor, frame, and I believe that's assess. Yes. Okay. Ensure that you can answer or speak to respond, remediation, risk response, and training. When it comes to frame, you want to be able to speak to the governance that's around it. So frame, framework, right? Risk strategy, risk appetite. What percentage are, where's that at, right? What percentage of vulnerabilities is allowable? What isn't? Where do we draw the line? For monitor, monitor or monitoring, you have inspection. So are there any type of internal inspections that we can do? A lot of times the word inspection goes over a lot better than internal audit. There are words that carry certain negative connotations, so I can understand the need to say, okay, we're just doing an internal inspection versus, an internal audit, right? Technical testing, how can we prove we're doing this? Is there a type of operational readiness test, right? But the point that here is, once you're able to have a conversation about all of those surrounding areas, then again, very similar to the slide earlier in the presentation, the process or the life cycle or the maturity model that's going to carry that should just pop and fall into place, right? You don't want to implement something like the CREST SOC maturity model to a network operations center. Like, that makes no sense, right? But in the same right, you probably, if you have a dual space that's running security operations and network operations, you might want a maturity model that's, closer to the CMMC. But that gets very noisy too. It's a very, very busy workbook. Um, and even for those that have been in the industry a long time, it's a lot for one person to try and comb through. So I'm a huge advocate for, again, defining those areas that are around those core words, and then having the broader discussion of, okay, here's every life cycle that could apply, here is every process that could apply, what do we want to do, right? Because then that way management feels like they're heard and they have a say, but at the same time they're hearing you. And again, it dies that chatter down. All the good ideas, all of the suggestions that may or may not be relevant are less, because you're streamlining it through a conversation before that core one happens, right? So everybody will have a chance to weigh in when, we have the conversation about assess. So what are we doing for risk analysis, right? What are we doing for our capabilities, right? They'll have that time to give their input, and it dies a lot of those side conversations and chatter down. And because the last thing you want when you're standing up a process or a new project are huge icebergs, right? Those are the ones that don't look so big on the surface, but will stop you dead in the tracks because of how deep it goes. So it's a lot of communication, it's a lot of conversations, but productive conversations. Otherwise, to me, it's noise. But once you get to that point, then you want to tie it into a security, well, a security maturity model, or you can do a continuous maturity model. Again, that's typically a higher decision. But what I found more useful is saying, okay, look, for the section of the project that I work on, that I manage, this is the maturity modeling I used. This is what it looks like. This is where we landed. Here are our results. That is more often than not very well received. But just also, if that's the approach you decide to go with, be prepared for the what do we do now? What are the next steps? How do we tie this in, right? It's a lot of that out of the box critical thinking. So for me, it was a lot of conversations with people that have more experience in this area. This was something I did do this year, very outside of my comfort zone. Lots of late night conversations with people that have either done it, are doing it, or their project is getting ready to do it, because maturity modeling, it's critical, at least from where I sit in the industry right now. And for us, it's a borderline make or break. Because it shows growth, it shows progression, but it also shows the ability to streamline and then orchestrate and automate all of it. So anything that helps tie all of the incident response and incident event management into your orchestration automation, I'm a fan for, but I don't expect my NOC engineers to understand what that means. I work in a very unique, I guess environment is a good word. So we are not a cybersecurity operations center. We are a security operations center and a network operations center under one space. But the idea is, and management agrees, that we should be streamlining to more of an advanced SOC or a CSOC type maturity modeling, but it can't be all at once because it'll be highly disruptive. So that's where a lot of this conversation and this talk really came from, was all of that, all of the side conversations, all of the late nights, all of the research, so that if and when you guys are faced with this or come across this, or even if it's not you and you have a friend that's like, hey, I need to talk or talk this through, you might have some advice to give. That way they can help kind of control and settle the conversation, and kind of ease the confusion. Because again, with a lot of these, we're saying similar things, but it's not being heard, or it's just not being communicated in the right way. And I'm not really quite sure how I did on time, but that is the end of my presentation. But where I wanted to land it is bringing it back to you guys, right? And this is where I want to almost unmute everybody, and talk about it, right? Let's have a conversation about it. But I want to bring it back to, what is your passion, right? What makes sense to you? Have you learned anything from this presentation that you can use? And with that, I'm going to do it. I'm doing it. But what I do ask is, when I do this, if one person's talking, just try not to talk over them. Yes. Are we unmuted? Hmm. Okay, so I think I've successfully unmuted everybody. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that, this is the time. I can't hear anybody, so I hope I'm not having audio issues. I see. Go to the questions pane. I'm so confused right now. I apologize, guys. I can't hear anybody. I'm new. Okay, well, thank you, Merritt. I read that. Okay, I'm getting the questions in the question pane now. Carlos, did you want me to bring up ISSA? More about it? I saw your question in there. Still trying to figure out why I can't hear anybody.
They have to unmute.
There we go. Somebody was talking.
I just said they have to unmute.
Oh, okay. So I am muted, everybody, so you have the ability to mute and unmute yourselves if you want to have a live conversation. If not, I do have the questions panel open. So if you drop it in there and you just want me to live answer to it and speak to it, I'm more than comfortable doing that as well. Okay, it doesn't seem like I'm getting a lot of questions. And that's perfectly fine. But oh, there's one. Let's see. What would you, so this is from Nigel. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. What would you suggest to someone who wants to enter the field where they might have the book knowledge but hasn't had the hands-on experience? This is a great question. So for me, a lot of it went back to, again, something I was really, really good at, and a lot of book knowledge. So I knew a lot about information assurance, right? I didn't know a lot about cybersecurity or how to apply it or what even the difference between those two terms were. So the first job I took after getting out of the military, which again had nothing to do with cybersecurity or this industry in any regard, I was a technical writer. I had to research one, how to write technically, which is completely different than writing for an English class in college. I'll throw that out there. Um, but I also challenge and encourage you to either find a school program or something you can do online. There's a lot of great resources out there. So that's what I did. I also went out on a limb and I was going to night school for 6 months. But that's again, that's me, that's my journey, that's what I did. But those were the steps that I took because I didn't come from this industry. And also, all of the college work I had done up until that point had nothing to do with cybersecurity or information assurance in any way. So you have websites like Cybrary, you have Udemy, you have Google cybersecurity courses, free cybersecurity courses. They're everywhere. YouTube is a great resource as well, but that's more of like, it depends on if you want to get hyper technical. Um, I'm just more of an advocate of the platform, so like Udemy or Cybrary, just because I can trust the content. YouTube, you get a lot of questionable or reliable videos that are out there when you're trying to learn something for that hands-on piece. I also know a lot of peers in the industry that are huge advocates of piece together your own home lab, and start trying to figure out, what you can afford right now and what it takes to, I don't know, start to pen test or start to write Python script or wherever you want to go. But again, for you, that's going to be about your personal journey, about what you're passionate about. I'm not going to suggest that you deep dive into compliance if you literally hate it. Hopefully that answered your question. Do we have any more questions? Like I said, you guys feel free to unmute yourself and just ask live or drop it in the questions pane. And if not, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. This entire session has been recorded, so hopefully Evelyn will be sending that out to all of you. And I really, really hope you guys found value in this. Thank you, Tiffany. Also, shout out to Tiffany. She just got her Security Plus certification, so that's huge. And I always love reading that she loves my presentation, so thank you. I put a lot of work into these and a lot of stress, believe it or not. Public speaking is probably one of my biggest fears, but something that I try and do regularly to try and overcome that, right? And stay relevant in the industry. Carlos, why? Carlos shared my profile link, I think, to LinkedIn in the questions pane if anybody wants it. You could reach out and connect with me. But a great thing that he brought up too is, right, I wanna circle this back a little bit to the resources that brought you this conference today, right? So ISSA, the Information Systems Security Association, it's an international nonprofit for those of you that don't know, and there's local chapters globally, right? So I am the chapter president for Fayetteville, Fort Bragg. So if you're in my area, please check us out. We have a huge social media platform. We have Slack. We also have LinkedIn, we have Instagram, we're everywhere. Carlos is my de facto COO, but our communications director if we're going with actual real names. Thank you, Noreen. Oh, I appreciate that so much coming from you. So Noreen in the question, she didn't ask a question, but she said, awesome presentation. Thanks for sharing your insights and knowledge. Well, thank you for attending. And then also, I think Carlos just went ahead and dropped our LinkedIn company page. So for ISSA Fort Bragg, in the questions as well, and you can follow us, add us. We do trainings like this every month. So be on the lookout for those. And then again, anything that Triad puts out there, because that's the only reason why I was able to present to you guys today. And if you enjoyed talking to me or just being, not really talking to me, but being a part of this, tomorrow we'll be closing out the conference with a live panel. And that will include myself, Miss Noreen, William Ogle from EY, and a couple of other industry leaders. And we're going to be talking about inclusion and diversity and kind of filling that gap and what it takes. So if you're interested, that's how we're closing out tomorrow's or the rest of, well, I guess it's ongoing from today into tomorrow, but that's how we're closing out the security summit for ISSA Triad. So I cannot see the questions to the presenter. Oh no. Well, let me see if I can fix that real quick. I know what I can do. Give me 1 second. I'm going to fix that for you, Merritt, or attempt to. Just bear with me. Hey, Carlos, can you drop those links in the chat and not in the question pane? I have a feeling if we drop them in the chat, they'll be able to access them that way. Because wait, I can do that. Hold on. You don't have to do that. I figured it out. Okay, so there's one. There's 2, and this is at least the Fayetteville Fort Bragg, our latest and greatest website, which is amazing. We put a lot of work into that this year. So those are all the links, ladies and gentlemen. They're in the chat now, not in the question pane. Apologies for that. But if nobody has anything else, I'm really loving the feedback, and I'm not trying to boss you around, Carlos. It's okay. But thank you guys for joining me this afternoon and taking the time, like honestly, like out of your day to hear what I had to say on this topic. And like I said, this whole thing was recorded, so Evelyn should be, we'll figure out what the next steps are on the recordings, I'll say it that way. But the slides will be available on my LinkedIn page. So if you guys want to just have them for content, use them, keep them, learn from them, change them, tweak them, just give me a shout out if you do. But I would just, again, thank you guys. And I really, really hope you guys got something out of it. So enjoy the rest of your day, but I am going to stop recording this now, or stop live broadcasting now. At least I hope I am. And then you guys just enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everyone.